A little more. Okay, it's actually a cow bone. So here's a cow bone, and then a pine cone, and then a dried pumpkin. To do a positive shape study, uh, you're not concerned about detail like we've been with line, whether we're especially contour, but also gesture. It's more the uh, the shape, and by shape I define that as when you have the end point of a line meeting the starting point of another line. That makes a shape. If there's a gap, then to me that's more of a line. But it can be an implied shape, like a dotted line going around something to imply any kind of a circle, maybe. So that I understand how that could be interpreted as shape. So I would encourage you on your own time to do a positive shape study. I find this is so easy for students that I don't need to spend class time doing it. But lay out like 2 to 3 objects and notice that where they overlap, uh, there's no edge shown, and that's why you can't tell, especially the pine cone, what it is. Whereas from a different view, you can see the pine cone clearly. Okay, so this is a different view, and I was able to differentiate the 3 objects more, and you start to get a sense for that being a vertebrae. So for a positive shape study, it's better to choose very solid looking objects like a fruit, a vegetable, a bone. Not a rope. A rope would not be a good subject matter. I did draw a frayed rope, but I wouldn't recommend that. So I would take a still life of a couple of different objects and maybe do 2 different views. And you can see that it flattens the objects so that they're no longer 3-dimensional, they're 2-dimensional. And shape is 2-dimensional. Next week we're going to get into form, which is 3-dimensional. Okay? So that's positive shape. Now let's look at negative shape. Negative shape is what is so challenging. So here is the rope study, okay? And notice that the emphasis has been placed on the space in between the sections of rope, okay? And I've also had a lot of variation. Not all the negative space sections are the same size. Some are larger, some are smaller. But it's not just that I filled in the negative space between the pieces of rope. The rope is the positive shape. It's more the process of drawing, how I drew it. And the process of drawing this means that you have to change what you're focusing on. When I drew the rope, and you'll see it when I start to demonstrate, I was not drawing the rope itself. I was drawing the shape of like this space. Okay? I was paying attention to that shape. Now, I wouldn't do something this complicated. This is very challenging to do this. And you may find with some of your organic forms that you're going to draw tonight that that's going to be a little overwhelming and you're going to get lost. You'll lose your place, and that's okay. The organic forms, just like we've already discovered with contour and gesture drawing, are more complicated than geometric or fabricated objects. However, they are more forgiving because of that very fact that they are so complicated. So if you mess up on some part of the negative space study, no one will know with a plant, whereas a cheese grater, they may know. Okay? Now, even given that, I did kind of have to cheat sometimes because I wanted the rope to maintain a certain width, and when you get out to the outside edge of the form, that's called open negative space, and it's the space surrounding the object. It's up to you if you want to fill that in completely with whatever material you're working with, be it graphite, charcoal, or ink. Or you don't have to fill it in at all. It can be a line study that is focused upon the negative shape where you just use line. I like to fill it in because it really, with this negative shape being black or gray or whatever, it really puts emphasis upon the negative shape. This is called closed negative shape because it's closed off. It's not open like the outside edges of the form are, which goes all the way to the edge of the paper. And then here was the pine cone. And that was all open negative space. There was no closed negative space. So you'll learn more if you have an object that has some closed negative space within the object. It can be tricky though, especially like I was looking at an egg beater, and that would be not good because you've got negative space on top of negative space with an egg beater. And that's too complicated for us to examine tonight. And if you have some limbs of like the Christmas cactus that Susan's doing, and you end up, you can see through the plant, and you end up layering one negative area behind a other negative area. Just pick the front negative space and ignore the other layers, and it'll make, if this doesn't make sense to you as you start to draw, I think that'll gel and you'll understand what I'm saying. Okay, let me show you some other studies I've done that are large. This is iron that was, and this is done in ink. So far I've shown you charcoal. Okay, so this was an iron that was positioned onto a table, a decorative table. This is some still life objects we have at Southwest. And you have closed negative space where the handle meets the rest of the iron. But then I made sure to drape the cord down so that I got some closed negative space here. And some nice details on the edges of this decorative little table. And notice how I use dry brush going to the edge of the paper. I added some kind of gestural energy, so you don't have to completely fill the negative space with whatever material you're drawing with. Okay, and that lent its own energy. Kind of has a comic book feeling to it. This was we had an umbrella at Southwest School, and it was rotting. It was a paper umbrella from somewhere in Asia, and this was quite challenging to do this. And I did have negative space layered on top of negative space, and I just focused on the first layer because there were other holes behind holes, basically. Let me get this position. And you may find, like with this, that the drawing starts to become abstract to the point of non-objective. I mean, maybe you would know that this is a tattered umbrella. Maybe you would not. But whatever it is, I think it's interesting and has really unusual, organic, irregular shapes. And I used ink to fill that in, just like the iron. Notice the ink, how shiny it is. India ink does that when it dries. But if you want black, black, black with a painted material, then ink is what you want to use. And if you're going to work with ink, you'll need to have some round brushes, some flat brushes, some different size brushes. And it may be that you also use pen and ink. Like although I don't think I did, I used a very fine detail brush, like to get that rip It was just a line. Okay. Now this one, I used compressed charcoal, and compressed charcoal is, we haven't used charcoal yet. Compressed charcoal is velvety black. Now vine charcoal is more smoky, and I'm going to show you some examples of how to shade with different art materials and what those effects are. These are stools at Southwest School of Art that are stacked. So if you have chairs, you won't be able to do it as a tabletop still life, but chairs are really good to stack, and you can get some interesting effects. You know, and you start to, what I find with these is that they move towards abstraction. You can differentiate, like you can tell that's a stool, excuse me, the bottom of the stool, the legs of the stool, but then it just starts to, I don't know, I had something else in the middle of this, like maybe a mannequin torso. But once again, I was really focused on these. Now this is creating more geometric trapezoidal kinds of shapes because it's a fabricated object. So that's a different study in negative shape, and I would encourage you to do that. You know, in class tonight, I'm going to start with my grapes, my grape stems. But I would encourage you to try doing this with an organic form and also with a fabricated form. Okay? So those are my large examples. Okay, and we're going to go to the, I'm going to go to the handout, so I'll share my screen. And I think that Fang Ling is here now. Hi, Fang Ling. Hopefully we'll have some more students join us. Maybe there might be some weather-related issues. Isn't it nice having some rain? I'm so happy to have some rain. And I gave some of you some comments that had loaded your gesture work from last week, so that's in the class work. You all don't forget to post in the stream so others can see what you're doing. Okay, so this is, everybody, are you seeing the positive, negative shape handout? Hopefully you are. So this is a quote from the British sculptor Henry Moore: "A whole can itself have as much shape, meaning as a solid mass." If you want to see some of Henry Moore's sculptures, you can go to Trinity University here in San Antonio and walk on the campus grounds. They have superb examples of really important sculptors from the modern era, 20th century. Okay, and this is kind of reiterating what I've already said, that, you know, there's two types of space, and you hear different terms for this: positive space, positive shape, negative shape. Figure is interchangeable with positive shape. Ground is interchangeable with negative shape. That usually refers to more figurative art. Okay? And you can think of these spaces fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. These are some of Henry Moore's sketches on the right. So he did wonderful sketches planning out his very organic, abstract sculptures. This is a piece I did in Berlin. I would say this is a positive shape study. It was a dried flower that a Dutch artist who was staying there gave me when she left. And I did this very large piece with it. And it's multi-layered using gouache, markers, I collaged in books that I bought in the Berlin flea market, and this is ink. that I painted on top. So it really, this whole series of work was looking at just the beautiful greenery of Berlin. It's so beautiful and lush, especially coming from a dry place like here. But at the same time, it's there's the weight of history in Berlin. So it was these two different emotions that I felt while I was there. I also got some pump sprays in Amsterdam that sprayed in a very coarse way. I like spraying paint. I don't use spray paint because I don't like how toxic it is, but I do pump sprays. In fact, I'm doing that in my water media class soon that I'm teaching as well. Okay, so like I already said, read this handout, and I recommend that you do some positive shape studies. Okay. So when we're studying negative shape, negative space, we're really concentrating on drawing the background, leaving the object white, or whatever the ground is that you're working on, ground being the paper. So you're drawing the shape of the space around and in the object. Okay. Now, if there's no negative shapes within the object, then you're going to make a silhouette, and you're going to have open negative shape around it. So when you draw the object, this is what, do not do this, and I have an example. You don't want to do this with the wine opener, where the student drew the wine opener and then started to color in the area around the wine opener. That is a positive shape study using contour line, and you're just shading in the negative space. It's not a negative space study. And honestly, you know, I might, if I'm not watching you do it, I might not know that you didn't do a negative shape study. It's about how you're looking at the object and what you're focusing upon. And I usually can tell, because like this is definitely, of this chair, is definitely a negative shape study. That's really clear. And that's just using line. So you could practice tonight just with line, and then later you could fill this in with a material, whatever you're working with, or just leave it as a line. So it's up to you. So just be wary of not doing this. You won't learn anything doing this in terms of negative shape. And this is just some diagrams to show you like studies where you flip the positive and negative shapes. This is called figure ground reversal. Do you see two different forms in these? Like here, what are you really focused on? What shapes do you see? Is that Jude? Yes, there's spaces. Okay, someone else, what do you see here? And the one on the right. Okay, is that Susan? Yes. You see a vase. Oh, Feng Ling, you see a vase. And we tend to focus on things that are darker, are heavier, and grab our attention. So we're going to tend to look at what's darker. What's in here, I mean, it's black and white. So we're going to look at what's black first. That'll be the general tendency. That's why I say if you want to draw attention to your negative space, you want to shade it. Okay? Alright, so here's our assignment tonight, and there's a negative shape study of a flower, and I have one student I know who's going to be using a Christmas cactus, so this is like what you're going to be doing, and this has both closed negative shape and then open negative shape. This is actually closed. Well, it goes off the edge of the paper, so you could say it's open, but you've got but it's closed within this section, whereas this is open, okay? And that's, something else I've done with this class and at Southwest School, and it's something you might think about, something fun, is to set up lamps and have your still life objects like up against the wall. Like Susan could take the Christmas cactus and put it on a table, and then put some lamps and study the shadow that's cast on the wall. And the shadow is going to be a positive shape, and then the space between the shadow will be the negative shape. But it's something you might consider doing. Okay? Alright, so I'm going to end our share and go back to my screen. And I'm going to lower the camera so you can look at some other samples. By the way, and I have a student here tonight who missed last week. This was the gesture that I did, the gestural study that I was working on last time, and I finished it. I did post it, and we were using a round brush with ink, and I was studying a snake plant. Okay. And just notice my variation and line width. This is a sustained gesture. I mean, it took me the period of the class, but you can work with gesture to be much faster than that. I was doing mannequin studies with the student on Friday, and I was timing her, and we were doing 1 minute to 3 minutes. Like those wooden dummies you can get in the art supply stores. Those are good for, I don't have time in this class to talk about figure drawing, but if you want to learn how to draw the figure, I recommend getting a human mannequin and doing those kind of gesture studies. And what I saw from the work that was turned into me, you're going to have your comfort level that's either going to move more towards contour or move more towards gesture. If you like more controlled and exacting, then you're going to be more comfortable with contour. If you like more loose and sketchy and dry brush like, and working very quickly, spontaneously, then you're going to like gesture more. And I combine both. It really often depends on how much time I have when I'm sketching, and if my subject matter is moving. If my subject matter is moving, it's all going to be gesture. Okay, so this is a sample sheet that I put together of different materials in terms of how to depict the negative space and to fill it in. Okay, and so you'll just have time probably tonight to do one. I'll try to squeeze in 2 drawings, but I doubt I will get that done. So this is graphite, and I used like a bee. And I think it's nice to, and you'll see a drawing that I did in a minute, but make it darker near the positive shape, and then practice shading. This is called continuous tone. And by letting up off the pressure, I made the tone more gray, less mid-range, less dark. And you can use your finger to blend it. And the finger is the best for graphite because of the oils in your body. It will deposit into the graphite and blend them better. Vine charcoal is faster. And I have some vine charcoal that's darker than this now, but vine charcoal will blend much faster than graphite. It depends on what level of bee you have. You can get it soft, medium, hard. So this is probably a medium, a little more hard. I have some that's much softer now. You cannot blend that with your finger though. It'll lift right off the paper. And it's best that you work on drawing paper, not sketchbook paper, because it has a tooth and grabs the charcoal. So for blending, I would use the stump, that cloth, two-pointed object made from coiled paper. That, or you could use a paper towel or a chamois, a little piece of leather. And you're going to have to seal it afterwards because it's very fragile, or you'll need to put newsprint on top to protect it. This is compressed charcoal, and you can see it's very dark. Compressed charcoal is in terms of a dry media, that is how you get velvety dark. A black pastel will also do this. Conti crayon will as well, but it's more oily and less messy. This is very messy. You can see some of the dust has come off of it, and I sealed this. So sealing it, I mean you use some kind of workable fixative by Krylon, or you use, I like to use Spectrafix, which is milk casein based and is non-toxic, or hairspray. You can use hairspray, especially Aquanet. Now this is ink. This is black ink, and in my camera it doesn't look very much different from the charcoal, but it's very different. I'll hold it up to the light and you'll see the ink is very shiny, which the charcoal is not. There you go. You can see how shiny that is. Very different effect. So it really just depends on what you want practice with, and if you do more than one negative shape study, I do one in dry media like graphite or charcoal and one in wet media like ink. Okay. I mean, you could do it in paint too. You could do it if you have acrylic paint, or acrylics, or gouache. Gouache is an opaque watercolor. You could do it that way too. Okay, this is a study I did of some leaves using graphite. One of the previous times I taught this course. So I really was, I just laid, I think these were pecan leaves, and I just laid 2 twigs down on some paper and observed them. And then I put emphasis on the closed negative space, and then I just gradually faded the outside tone on the open negative space towards the edge of the paper. And I liked my contour line. When you get to this point, the outside of the form, you have to draw the edge of the positive shape. There's no other way to get around it. That's why it's really important what you have tonight has closed negative shape, because that's when you truly are drawing negative shape, not positive shape. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, when you start working, it'll make more sense. Okay? All right. So let's look at some different objects we could draw tonight. So this is what I'm going to draw, and this is I ate some grapes, and after I ate them, I'm like, oh, I'm covering negative shape on Tuesday. You know, this is perfect. It's really complicated, and it's got some cool negative shape areas. So it's up to you how you wanted to handle. It is making a very nice shadow. That's why I say put things on like a solid paper so that you can see the shadow. I would consider the shadow is a positive, like I said, is a positive shape. And then in between where you see the gaps in the shadow, that's also negative shape. But that could get complicated because you're going to have negative shape on top of negative shape. So like I said, if you catch yourself in that kind of moment, then just work with one layer of negative shape. Okay, now a non-organic materials, like I had these tongs And there's a negative shape there, of course, in between the tongs. But I could complicate it, like layering like that on top the cheese grater. Now that gets hard, because when things are fabricated like this is machine cut and it's exact. And if you don't get each hole depicted pretty much accurately, it's very clear. But you're working by hand. There's a charm in that. A potato masher. That's got some interesting negative shape areas that are curving. I have this sieve spoon that also, kind of like the cheese grater, has those holes like a bicycle wheel. That's super challenging because you have all these triangular spaces made by the spokes. Okay, so those are some ideas for you all tonight as far as negative shapes. You could take string and just lay some string down on the paper. Um, Probably something I would do like black string, or like a shoelace is good, so that you can clearly see it, the negative space. Okay. All right. So that's our goal tonight, is to depict some negative shapes or space. And I know I don't have a small example where I've used ink, so I know I'm gonna use ink. And I'm gonna put my grape stems here. And I think I'll turn it this way. Since the graphite one was done portrait style, and my camera will focus. How's everybody doing? You're getting some good rain at your house? Yeah. You too, Jude? You're getting some rain? It's so nice. Yeah, I was in the medical center and it was really thundering. So I know Susan is doing a Christmas cactus. Jude, what are you going to draw tonight? Okay. Okay. Sorry, I put you on the spot. Okay. Fang Ling, what are you going to draw tonight? Oh, some Yes, that would be good. And maybe you could incorporate something like something that you're gonna cut, which could be a plant, part of a plant. You could do a whole little narrative, that the implied action of the object. Okay, so I'm gonna. Now I've got lots of closed negative space here. This is open negative space. This is open negative space. So you're gonna have to start by drawing the object's outer edge to get your form developed. Okay? But then I'll tell you when I'm switching to closed negative shape, and I'm really focusing on the negative shapes. So I'm pretty much drawing the form. I'm doing a contour study of the outer edge. But even so, I'm looking at this negative space. There's going to be lots of triangular shapes in this, and I'm not doing this just to torture you. I promise. You'll see there'll come times when I'm working on a still life, and I'm going to say, okay, I need to focus on the negative shape here and look at what that shape is. So you apply it. It's not just an abstract exercise. It's directly applicable. And it's also, so much of learning to draw is learning to see. It's about observation skills. And now I've got a negative shape. This is closed negative shape that I just drew. I was looking at that bok choy drawing you did, Fang Ling. I've got some bok choy in my crisper. I need to fix. I was like, oh, I gotta go fix that. Me too. me too. I'm all in my oil painters I teach on Friday. We're always eating our props. Yeah, actually, I went to the Korean market this week, and they have some fantastic shaped mushrooms. Like some oyster mushrooms that are huge. They're like a foot long. And I love mushrooms. I love drawing them. They're such fantastical shapes. So that's good still life material. Looking at unusual vegetables, and so if you're in special markets like that, think about it. Okay, it's starting to have that grape look. Something I think we all can relate to. We've all eaten grapes. I also liked this because it's such a mundane, common thing. And, uh, it all depends on how you observe it and how you depict it. That a drawing of a garden hose might be more interesting than a drawing of the Grand Canyon. So don't dismiss your everyday world as potentially being fascinating. Now, there's just a little sliver of negative space right there. So sometimes the negative space may be very minuscule. Okay, I've got a piece of closed negative space happening here. Sometimes it can help to associate the negative space with something familiar, like here I was thinking, oh, it's like the letter D, as in dog. So And kind of have markers as you draw with the object, like there's kind of a reddish stem here, and so I don't lose my place. So like on the Christmas cactus, if there's blossoms in certain places, use those as markers. And something else you should do if you're going to color in, put a little X with your pencil where you're going to color in the negative space, okay? And that'll help you from getting lost. Need to sharpen. In doing this, I find it's important to keep a sharp point. I've got little pieces of bark or strands coming out from the stems that I need to be able to draw, and I need a sharp pencil for that. And make your X's as you go. And now I'm getting to a point where I'm going to start having more and more negative space. There's one. I find these studies, they start to have kind of a fractured look to them, like shards of shapes. And I really like how they move in and out of, is it non-objective, is it abstract, is it representational? You see an object and then the object starts to disappear into just shapes. And I think that's interesting. But you see, I just drew these three shapes here, and I drew the negative space. I didn't draw the stems that are creating the negative shape on the other side. I just drew the negative shape. Oh, it startled me. So I like to get those little mechanical pencils at the dollar store. These and these little erasers, they're useful. So if they fall out, save them. And put them in a little baggie, because like when you need to get into tight places, those are useful. There are also electric racers that have them that size. Electric racers can be interesting. Have some interesting effects. I can talk about that more when we get to value. Oh, that, no, it's not. That's okay, Jude. That's what I meant about manufactured objects. They're not forgiving. And glasses are hard. Like when I've done, I mean, I wear glasses, and when I've done portraits, most people have glasses on, and it's challenging. It's getting the symmetry. Just keep in mind that the lens is a distorted circle, and then go from there. Alright, I finished the grapevine. I'm going to look at the shadow underneath. In some places I can put the shadow. But I'm going to leave the shadow as the ground, meaning it's going to stay white. So I changed my mind about doing the negative space with vine because I thought, vine charcoal is made from grapevine. So it would be cool to do this drawing with actual vine charcoal, which is made from the substance that I just drew. So that's what I'm going to do. And that way you can also see me use charcoal in my stump. So this is the vine charcoal, and this is medium. We also have willow. And when we went over art supplies, oops, I talked about these. I think I'll work with the regular vine. That's probably what you have. The willow is kind of a brownish, warm brown, and the warm black, and the vine is more of a cool gray black. And this is my stump. So and these come in different densities. You can see I have a thin one, and I have a thick one. And, they do get full. This is a number 5. And, I can't see the number on this one. Well, I would say a number 3 probably, or number 2. And you can, if you have one of these sandpaper pads that you get with like General's Art Supplies, comes with these little pads. You can clean your stump on these like this, rubbing it. Or you can just on a scrap piece of paper clean it. This will clean the stump. No, I drew with charcoal. This is charcoal that's on the stump. It also makes that sharp, makes that come to a point. That's what these sandpaper blocks are for. So if you got that General set, it may have had these. Okay, and the reason this is handy is like when you're blending. If you think about look at your little pinky. Okay, that's your smallest finger. Okay, that's still compared to the point on this stump. That's a lot more surface area. So this can get, and I've got a lot of little crevices in here. I want to get into those crevices, and I'm going to use the stump to do that. Also, a kneaded eraser is useful. I bought a new one for this class. So here's my brand new Prismacolor kneaded eraser. Ooh, look at that in French. I never knew that word. Caoutchouc pétri. Je parle un peu. So your kneaded eraser is like clay. And you need your kneaded eraser. When we get to value is when you really need it. You can even take these, the white plastic erasers, and you can carve them, like with an X-Acto knife, to make them come to a point. There are some neat erasers that are triangular. They're sort of rounded triangulars. I find them useful. Erasers aren't just for getting rid of marks, they're also drawing tools. goodness. When you open your kneaded eraser, don't use the whole thing. If it's this is a pretty big one. So I'm just going to pull off some. You can see it's like gum. And you can mold it, like to a point. And as you manipulate it, it warms up and gets easier to mold. But if you need to erase, like to get into small areas, it can come to a point that allows you to do that. So I might have to do that at some point in this drawing. Okay, so I'm going to work with my vine charcoal. And you can see it says medium. I could have gotten softer or harder. This doesn't have a numerical designation like pencils do. It's medium, soft. Let me look at my Willow, see if it does. Well, it actually says assorted. Now, I had initially planned to do this in ink, but then I changed my mind. So I need to go in and erase those little X's as I move through the drawing. And with charcoal, even more than graphite, you need to think about your movement on the page so that you don't smear things. So I'm working with my right hand, so I'm going to go from left to right. Because if I shade this in, I'm going to smear it moving the opposite direction. And you can get a scrap piece of paper and put that underneath your hand. It's still going to smear some when you're moving with your hand, but you won't get it all over you. If you don't want to smear it all, then take like a 2x4 and brace that across the pad so that your hand is actually raised so that you don't smear it all. In lithography, that's a type of printmaking. I've done litho. We do that because not only do you smear the drawing, you deposit grease into the litho stone, and that can roll up, and you don't want that. Okay, so as I go, I'm going to just get rid of my little X. But I want to do that as I'm moving. So now I'm adding emphasis to my negative space. You can see this vine charcoal is much darker than my sample. It's a nice smoky, really it's gray. I mean, comparing this to compressed charcoal, this is gray. And I think I'll wait. I want to get all my negative space on this side of the plant done. And you can take an X-Acto knife, and that's kind of blunt. I'm going to trim that with my X-Acto knife so that it's sharper. Okay, so I'll do it over, oops, piece of paper so you can watch me do it. You can save this powder and don't breathe it in. It's carcinogenic. It's burnt. Anything burnt is carcinogenic, so you don't want to breathe this. But you can sharpen your charcoal to come to a point. You also can buy charcoal pencils. which are really useful. But I'm going to try to work just with vine, not with that. Charcoal pencils are compressed charcoal. So we'll talk about that more when we get to working with value. Okay, so now I've decreased the surface area of the tip of the charcoal so I can get more into these delicate areas. If you don't have an X-Acto knife, you can use a utility knife or a razor. Or a knife, just a knife from your kitchen. And you can still eat with it. I mean, it's burnt wood. That's what it is. It's very natural. So this is now putting emphasis on my negative space. That I might have to use a copper pencil to get into, or a graphite pencil. Actually, graphite matches the charcoal a little better. Like for these fine areas, I'm just going to go ahead and use my graphite pencil to get in there. There's these little strands where the grape attached to the stalk. And you'll see if you're working with charcoal, it kicks up a powder. Try not to blow it, because then you could breathe it in. Just after you're done, you can place the pad over a garbage can and tap it. And the dust itself is going to make streaks, so you can. Sometimes they're quite interesting, and you can leave them. Other times you may not want them, and then just erase them, and then spray with a fixative outside if it's a propellant spray. You can do the Spectrafix inside. I know Herwick's had some Spectrafix. It's a pastel fixative. Edgar Degas invented it in the late 1800s when he was doing his pastels of ballerinas dancing. It's made with milk, and that's paint made from milk is called casein. I've never worked with casein, but you still shouldn't breathe it. It's got denatured alcohol, which, that doesn't sound good, but that's a heck of a lot better than toluene and those awful chemicals they put in those Krylon and 3M sprays. That you have to take outside and spray, but I kind of feel hypocritical. My art deals a lot with ecology, and if I shouldn't breathe it, is it really good for the birds to be breathing it and for it to be in the atmosphere? All that stuff gets sealed in our atmosphere. It's not going into outer space. So really, like, this is a very delicate area. Sometimes being an artist is like being a surgeon in terms of precision. Not everyone's cut out for that, but I need to go in and open that negative space up a little bit, and this kneaded eraser was the perfect tool to do that. So I find setting goals helps me with art. Like, my goal is to get all the negative space on this side of the main stalk filled in, and then I'm going to do some of the open negative space. And then I'm going to move on to the next area, and then the next. Artists tend to be task-oriented. That's how we get stuff done. I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. And I have a lot of satisfaction of completing tasks. It's like, oh, I got that done. Now I've got that done. That feels good. Okay, so now I'm going to start to handle my open negative space. And you can go ahead and do like an outline around using whatever you're using. Your graphite, charcoal, ink, like with your open negative space. Paint. You know, with the advent of laser technology, like, I was just thinking about this placemat I have. I got in Estonia when I was traveling in Northern Europe. It's laser cut, and Estonia is known for their felt. And so it's laser cut felt, and it's just this marvelous pattern. But it's such a wonderful play of positive and negative shape. But laser technology has allowed books and cards and all kinds of materials to have incredibly complicated positive versus negative shape contrast. So I'm going to start off real dark near the positive shape, and then I'll slowly start to let up off the pressure on the charcoal. Because there's a lot of open negative space, and it's not a big deal with ink, but with graphite and charcoal you will go through a lot of material if you fill in all of it. Now up here is a shadow, and I'm going to leave the shadow white. It's a positive shape. You could, if you're doing the shadow, you know, and it has a soft edge, which it will if it's moving away from the form, you can kind of feather the edge and imply that it's a shadow that way. Like I could do just like that. Versus the hard edge of the object itself. And I can take my, let me go ahead and do this so you can see it. And I'm trying to layer my strokes gently to just kind of get them as even as possible so I don't have streaking. And that's when working on drawing paper versus sketchbook paper becomes important, because the tooth on the paper is grabbing the charcoal. And I don't have to keep going with the charcoal. I can let the stump do this for me, do the fading. And it ends up having kind of a burnt look, which has a certain aesthetic, is aesthetically pleasing. So I think I'll work with my smaller stump. And I'm just gently blending, but with vine, it can also pick the vine up some, so you'll just have to gauge that as you work. But you're going to get quite a bit of, like if you're working with charcoal, you're going to get quite a bit of charcoal built up on the stump, and it can become a drawing tool in and of itself when it gets enough charcoal on it. But charcoal works much faster than graphite as far as building up tone. And it stays matte. It's not reflective the way that graphite becomes. Graphite becomes shiny, just like ink does, as you build up more of it. Charcoal does not. Okay, so that's very nice. That's a nice fade. You can see kind of the rough edge I left to the shadow. I'm not going to be able to, I don't foresee being able to finish this within a class period. Next week is very important. You do not want to miss next week. Next week is about planes, how to study planes. And I don't mean like, not like that kind of plane. I mean the sides of objects, which is one of the main ways that you can show three-dimensionality. So we're moving from 2D shapes next week into form, which is 3D. So next week, I would recommend that you bring a rectilinear form, a cube like a box, a spherical form like a ball, and a cylindrical form like a cup, like a coffee cup. Or for spherical, you could also use a bowl. Oatmeal box that you've taken the label off. It's better if it's white or a light color, so that you can see change in value. But next week is, if you want to show value, which some of you love to shade and you want to show value, and you can start to do some very simple studies in value with these shapes, these forms. But with spheres we have to shade them, otherwise it'll look like a circle. But the others that have abrupt changes in planes, like cubes, rectangles, you don't have to shade for them to look three-dimensional. So if you don't have objects like that around your home, you can go to like Michael's in the floral section, and they have white styrofoam geometric forms, and that's what I'm going to be working from next week. You could get pyramids are harder to find. If you really want to challenge yourself, pyramids are really tough. That's the hardest geometric form, I think, to draw. So start rounding up these objects for next week. And lighting is going to be important, so you want to have at least one desk lamp that you can put 45 degrees behind it, or 2 desk lamps. And you want a white surface to put those objects on. And we're just going to work in graphite. You can add, if you want to shade, you can shade with graphite or charcoal next week. Okay, so you can see I'm getting some nice change in dark. And let's compare that to my other sketch with the graphite. So now you can really see that graphite is gray and charcoal is much darker. Okay, so graphite has a silvery quality and charcoal has a much darker tonality. And I don't have any Spectrafix here. I'm working on a project at Southwest, and I've got all my Spectrafix there. But if you need fixative, I don't think Jerry's carries it. I don't know about Azel's or Michael's, but I know Herwick's had some, but they were low. Their stock was low. You could order it from Dick Blick or Jerry's online. But it's I'll put it in the chat, and actually it's on your supply list. Okay, and I'm just going to keep building up my value. I find it very I love negative space studies. I'm always surprised at how they turn out, and I find them very meditative. So I hope you do too. Another artist I can recommend that you look into is M.C. Escher, the Dutch graphic artist. His figure ground studies are magnificent. One I show classes a lot is these geese that are flying, and they're black on white, but then they slowly, the negative space starts to morph into the shape of a fish, and the birds become this amorphic shape. So it's complete figure ground reversal in that piece. So look up M.C. Escher too. All right, I think we're at time. So I don't think I had any other students show up. Okay. Yes, Susan.